Hello, YouTubers, and welcome back to another episode of The Grandstand here on the Ohio Patriot Education Network YouTube channel. I'm, as always, your host, AR the Ohio Patriot. And for today's episode, we're going to talk about what if the American Revolution, aka 1776, never actually happened. So, for those interested, I was running around Reddit this morning a little bit here and there, and something caught my eye from the History What If subreddit, which is from a couple days ago, and it was this guy talking about what if the U.S. never existed because the British were able to prevent the American Revolution with economic successions. And then it was simplified version, British, we need more colonies. Also British, nah, U.S. will provide us whatever we need. So here's the thing about that, though. You say economic concessions, and I think what this person and many others throughout, world history don't realize is that there was a lot more to it than just, oh, we're not going to burden you economically or whatever the case. We're not going to put undue taxation on you, whatever the case be. The entire point of what became the U.S. Constitution is you had many factors in that situation. It wasn't just taxation or the representation kind of stuff, which, by the way, was a whole thing itself. And if we're getting to that for a minute here or two, the entire point of the whole taxation representation issue that our founding fathers had was because a lot of them actually wanted seats in Parliament at the time, and were basically going to be given concessions to where either they would go back over to Britain and become part of Parliament, or it was something where they would have like proxy votes essentially, and it would be them basically, having like their dude whatever over there to vote for them and just like send that person letters like over time and stuff like that and be like, yeah, here you go, like this is what we need to do basically. The entire point of that is that you had that taxation, you had that burden and stuff like that, but you also had the taxation on other goods and stuff like that as well. But on top of everything else, you also had religious persecution back then. And this is something a lot of people don't realize. Like, you look back at Queen Elizabeth I specifically, like going back in that time period of history, like the 14th, 15th, 16th century, someplace in there, where she existed. And her sister, who became known as Bloody Mary. So you basically had this weird line of succession. There was a show recently about it called Becoming Elizabeth, I think is what it was. I watched it. It wasn't that good. So I got canceled after the first season. But basically, the first part of that show, you have King Henry VIII, I believe is what it was, their father, because it was a bunch of bastard kids is what it is. So you have him fucking around a bunch of women, have a bunch of kids with other women and stuff like that. You have this queen that's a childless queen who was his wife at the time, or whatever. She wanted the fucking throne for herself. Wasn't going to happen, obviously, because she didn't have any kids to become heirs, what it was there. Or become like Queen Regent, I think is what it was called back then, where you would have like, the baby basically being king, and it would be the mother essentially would be the queen at that point then. But anyway, so they basically had a thing where they were going to go find Henry's kids, and you had them find the two daughters and the son, and you had this kid who was like 10. I shit you not. He might have been younger than that. He might have been like 8 or 9, honestly. And they're like, "Oh, my king," because supposedly, like, for some retarded fucking reason, even though you have like a 17 or 18-year-old girl there that would have been Mary, who should have been actual queen at the time, it's like, oh no, let me go to first male heir to the fucking throne then, who was like almost 10 years your junior or something like that. And the big problem there is when you have these boy kings like that, it's exactly what fucked up a lot of history, honestly, because if you look at that particular series and stuff based on reality is what it is, there's a reason why Mary went fucking nuts after she took the throne, after her brother was killed and stuff like that, is because she was sick and tired of the anti-Christian hate is what it was. And it was basically, you had her brother, who was a Protestant at the time, like shit on Christians every chance he had is what it was. And then meanwhile, when Mary actually eventually did, succeed her brother and take the throne is what it was there, she killed a fuck ton of Protestants, dude. Like, she killed like several thousand Protestant people back then. And then, of course, you had Elizabeth take over after that. I think Mary was killed in some kind of revolution or something like that's what it was. If I'm not mistaken. You looked into it yourself, honestly. But yeah, Elizabeth eventually took the throne, and she was basically like hailed as like sort of a like peacekeeper more or less, because she didn't care one way or another like what the fuck you were. And I think that's the problem though, is like you had the British Empire back then, who I believe were very heavily Protestant, if I'm not mistaken, or like Puritans, whatever the case be. And you had a lot of America's founding fathers that were Christians and stuff. And that's why, and I still, like I'll say a year and a half ago, dude, this country was founded as a white Christian nation, period, in the story. If you have a problem with that, go fuck yourself, because it's the fucking truth. Now, granted, since then, we have become a so-called melting pot, obviously. I say so-called because, it actually requires people to melt into the fucking pot to actually be a melting pot, which unfortunately so many refuse to do that nowadays, especially those people coming over here, through our southern border with their own fucking country's flags, waving them as they're foreign invading us is what it is. Or you have Islamic terrorism everywhere, waving around fucking pro-Palestine flags and shit like that in Times Square last night when they were trying to do a wedding ceremony. It's just fucking disgusting is what it is, dude. But yeah, it's like, if these people really think that way, dude, they can go fuck off back to their own countries of origin is what it is. And stay the fuck out of America is what it is then, man. For real. But anywho, so basically, you had our founding fathers that were, and there's a reason why you obviously have the First Amendment being, freedom of religion and press and everything else like that, and freedom of speech. And it's because they wanted everything there. And the thing people don't realize, for that matter, either, for like a lot of the cases, because they don't look at U.S. history and they don't look into American history as what it is, or world history for that matter, to actually study into this stuff and be historically accurate and historical facts and things like that. And so what you end up with is you end up with this skewed view of things where you maybe gloss over it in like some civics course during high school or something like that for like a couple months or something, where in reality that's just like brushing the surface is what it is there. They need to go like deep dive into that for like a couple years is what it is then, to actually get like real in depth and constitutionalism and stuff like that is what it is there. And so in that situation, what you had was a lot of our founders would actually be going into churches, and you had a group of people known as the Black Robe Clergy is what it was. And it was basically these old various priests and stuff like that who were giving them sanctuary during the years that led up to the revolution, and then eventually during the revolution too, for that matter, where they were able to actually write the U.S. Constitution in secret. Because had they been found out, had Jefferson, had Washington, etc., been found out there, they would have been executed publicly for high treason against the British Empire. They would have been hung until they were dead, legitimately. Because they're in their own history, their own time period of history there, they were considered terrorists back then. Because they were defying the crown. And what's interesting to me, and this is something I actually learned more recently, I didn't realize this actually until a couple of years ago now, John Hancock, the guy who was the first dude that signed the Declaration of Independence, is what it was there. The reason he signed that so fucking big was because apparently, and this goes back to the whole Boston Tea Party thing, people don't realize that part of it. It wasn't just like a spur of the moment, like, yeah, fuck your goods and services kind of shit, and like fuck your taxation. It was that too, obviously. But apparently, I guess John Hancock had quite an empire himself in the tea business. And it was basically, you had the British Empire fucking over his ability to really make money because they were taxing the shit so heavily is what it was. And so he was like, nah, fuck that, dude. Like, fuck you. I'm taking that money back, bitch. And that's exactly what we're kind of seeing nowadays is what it is, man. That's why I'm surprised, honestly, that we haven't seen a second revolution in this country just based on taxation, honestly, or at least some kind of tax revolt for that matter, because of how much we've been unduly burdened in our own time period here is what it is. And I think, honestly, truthfully, if any of the founding fathers had come back, like if they were like transported throughout history or whatever, like into like modern history, like anywhere from like 20 to 50 years ago, you would have had them actually gin up enough support to actually have a revolution in this country again then, back in like anywhere from like the 70s to 2000s or so. So anyway, that being said, I think there's a lot more to it than people would think, honestly, with the revolution ever happening and stuff. Because, again, I think there was a lot more factors to what became the actual American Revolution in 1776 than what people want to talk about at face value. And with that situation there is you have basically anywhere from 15 to 20 years leading up to that time period of history where you had every other event happen. Then, I mean, the thing is, like, people always talk about, like, Boston Tea Party or Boston Massacre and stuff like that as if it happened, like, 3-4 months before the revolution happened. It's like, no, bro, that happened like years before that. It was like years to a decade before that kind of stuff. Like, it was basically just various events that all led up to this, precipice in time and history where you were at the cusp of something happening, and it was destined to happen eventually is what it's going to be. And that's why I believe, honestly, like, even if had it been, sort of like stalled back a few years or maybe a couple decades, whatever the case be, it still would have happened. That was what it is, man. Like, it might not look like an actual, like, straight up American Revolution. It might have been more like an American Civil War kind of thing or something like that. But yeah, like, there's a reason why you had all this infighting and stuff like that, dude. Not to mention, we can actually talk about, in reality right now of how our history actually is right now. And, what happened with the American Revolution? It led directly to the Whiskey Rebellion. And for those who don't know what the Whiskey Rebellion is, it could have been called the Rye Rebellion, actually, because it was basically on grains, like rye and stuff like that were used to make whiskey is what it was. And it was essentially, you had our founders, specifically Washington and company like that, who were like, yeah, man, we need to kind of tax you guys now because, we need to pay for this war we just fought is what it is. And the thing is, a lot of the guys, going back to the whole, what Tim Pool always talked about with the American Revolution and like privateers and stuff like that, where you had a lot of our founders own warships is what it was. They owned warships full of cannons and stuff like that. And that was the truth, man. And this is the big thing that people don't realize either, for that matter, is like how many of those dudes would have been considered billionaires in their own time, honestly. Because there was a lot of them, dude, whether it be a John Hancock type, whether it be a Washington or a Jefferson or something like that, is what it is. They were some rich motherfuckers, dude. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were sick and tired of being knuckled under. They were sick and tired of being, ruled over by some fucking king 2,000 miles away across the fucking sea is what it was. And when you had them, be burdened and everything else like that. And that's why when you look at the actual, Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and this is why I call myself a constitutionalist, by the way, because it's not really that I consider the whole Constitution, honestly. I'm more of a Bill of Rights, 14th Amendment Constitution, a list. And the thing is, I say that for that reasoning, because it was our founders that wrote the Bill of Rights, honestly. Pretty much everything after that, including the 14th Amendment, was all after their time. It was different presidents. It was Lincoln, the 14th Amendment, stuff like that. Eventually, when you go to like 19th and shit like that, that was back in like, the 1900s and stuff like that when that happened. Same thing with 26th Amendment. It was like the 60s and stuff. So it was like modern day jerk offs, a lot of which are actually still in power to this day, unfortunately, or at least their kids are anyway. Yeah, so it's a whole thing. But anyway, so what we basically have is a situation there where our founders understood like the basic things of why they fought this revolution and exactly what they needed to put in the Bill of Rights is what it was. And so that's obviously why you had, freedom of speech, the press, religion, etc., the First Amendment. Then you had the right to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment, and so forth and so on, And then you got the Third Amendment of not quartering soldiers in times of peace, which obviously happened back then, is what it was. Like, you basically had what led to revolution is what it was there. You had, British redcoats and stuff like that, or I think they were called regulators back then is what it was, because that's another thing people don't realize is like the whole Paul Revere ride and stuff like that. People were all like, oh, he's saying the British are coming, he's like, no, the regulars are coming is what it was. And it was because they all were technically British at the time is what it was, So why would you say the British are coming? Because it could be your own people if that were the case then, But anyway, the entire point I'm trying to make is that you have this dude who obviously did things differently. And it's like, again, it's sort of these things where you have somebody sort of shift the narrative or like wordplay or word salad or whatever it is there, where one phrase becomes something else is what it is eventually. And I think that's exactly what happened over time is what it was there. And that's why the whole British are coming thing became a thing then. And it's like the whole thing with the story of the first 20, for those who don't know about that one, actually. That's where the whole Godspeed thing came from. Because it was back in the day in the very early time period of revolutions there. And this was like legit, like one of the first battles in 1776 or so, I think, if I'm not mistaken, where you had, I forget exactly where this was located, but it was basically some pub and you had it being used as a munitions factory, more or less, where they were hiding like literal barrels of gunpowder and stuff like that, and balls and things like that they would use for the bullets back then. And so you had these dudes who were probably 50 to 100 strong at that point, I'm guessing, honestly, in this pub that day. And they were basically told, like, oh, yeah, there's going to be British coming. Like, like it was basically the Redcoats are coming there and they're going to fuck some shit up, whatever the case be. Like, we need to be ready for them when they come is what it is there. And I think what it was is that you had information that was sort of like mismanaged, I guess is what I'd say. Like, pretty much it's like the old telephone game, essentially, where it's like, you tell the first person one thing, and then by the time it gets to like 3 or 4 people down the line or whatever it is, it's like, oh, Johnny's dead now, or whatever the case be. Where in reality, it was like, it started out as like Johnny lost his foot in a battle or something, kind of thing, or something like that. And yeah, the entire thing is though is like you had these people waiting at this old pub, this bar, if you will. And the thing is, a lot of the places in those taverns is what it was. You actually had like rooms above the thing in like loft areas and stuff. And that's actually where some of the people actually lived. They lived in those like loft areas is what it was. And so you had like a few of those guys there that were like there no matter what it was, because that was their home essentially. And then you had other people who were just chilling out and stuff like that, like waiting for it and obviously getting their drink on and stuff like that with the small beer back then and whatnot. And eventually it started getting late, it started getting towards dinner time back then, and the sun started to go down, everything else like that. And people started, sort of being like, oh, we've been here for, 8-10 hours, whatever it is. It's like, they're not coming. Like, we might as well just go home, basically, and have dinner with our families and, go to sleep for the night or whatever the case be. And so a lot of them, like, trickled out, 1 or 2 at a time, maybe 3 or 4 at a time, until eventually there was only 20 or so people left there is what it is. And you eventually had, in the middle of the night then, 2 boats full of British soldiers, full of redcoats, come out of, they basically landed on the shore there is what it was, and started jumping off the boats and stuff like that, and, forming their thing, and they had torches, obviously, to light the way and shit. And I believe it was one of the guys that was at the pub that night had gone out to take a leak or whatever, and basically saw them, like saw the torch lights and stuff like that. And he's like, oh shit, they actually are coming. And he ran back inside, obviously told the pub owner guy who was the, like leader of the group, essentially. This dude tells his daughter to get on horseback and ride at God's speed. I shit you not, that's what he told her, basically. Or I don't know exactly, but if it was Godspeed, it was like ride like the wind or something like that. But he's like, yeah, ride for the territories, basically. And it was like this whole town that was like several miles away from there is what it was. And that was where everybody was then at that point. And the reason that they came up with the whole Godspeed thing is because for her to get to where she was at from that pub to the actual town and back, or the people would have got back there at time or whatever, it would have been damn near impossible for it to actually happen there unless there was some kind of intervention by God himself is what it is. And so she basically, rode her way to that town real quick, told everybody what was up. Those dudes came rolling back in with their, on horseback and everything else like that, with their rifles, their muskets, etc. And as they were rolling back in, you legitimately had 40 British troops fresh off the boats versus these 20 guys that were all drunk and everything else like that from the pub and, tired and all that stuff like that. Dudes riding up, literally seeing their buddies falling to the hail of gunfire from the British Empire, from the Redcoats, jumping off their horses and literally grabbing the muskets out of their dying friends' hands to fire back at the fucking British Redcoats. And because of that, the guys who came for backup were able to then take out a lot of these British soldiers. There was only a couple that actually ended up making it back to the boats, if I'm not mistaken. And they won that battle. And that's basically the gist of the story of the first 20, honestly. It's something that needs to be taught in schools, honestly, because of how awesome it actually is, dude, and how truthfully crazy it was back in those days. And it's something not many people know, honestly. It's something I didn't even know until about 8-10 years ago now, when I first heard this story on the Facebook Live is what it was from some dude. He obviously did it better than I did, but, I'm giving the Cliff Notes version of it is what it is there. But, yeah, it's pretty interesting, though. And like I said, I think there was definitely intervention back then. I think there was definitely various things back then that would have actually done things differently is what it is. And I believe, truthfully, history works out the way it's supposed to, honestly, I believe, truthfully speaking. And I think, unfortunately, too many people are so up their own ass nowadays is what it is. They refuse to actually look and see, like, what things are going to happen or various things that are about to happen, and don't realize that history will repeat itself. It might not be a direct repeating, but it'll be very close. It'll be a very similar line of events that basically occur that will eventually happen in the same kind of, textured structure, essentially. And it'll be that whole thing that'll lead to what we're seeing again right now, which is heading towards World War III, heading towards the Second American Civil War, et cetera there. Having globalists divide and conquer us. Speaking of globalists, thankfully that piece of shit Henry Kissinger died last night. Fuck that piece of shit. That guy was one of many assholes in the Bilderberg group. I hope he's burning in hell right now next to fucking Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Dianne Feinstein, and Hitler, honestly. Quartet of pieces of shit, honestly, in general. So, anyway. Yeah, hopefully Satan himself is giving those assholes a pineapple treatment right now, honestly. Who doesn't know what I'm talking about? It's that movie Little Nicky, where you had Henry Kissinger's Satan. Or sorry, not Henry Kissinger. Harvey Keitel's Satan giving Hitler the whole pineapple up the ass is what it is. So, great movie, by the way, if you've never seen it. It's a pretty good comedy. A lot of people don't like it, honestly, but I think it was one of the better ones Adam Sandler did, because it actually showed the kind of funniness of, like, it was essentially like a benevolent, yeah, I'm trying to pronounce that word. You guys know what I'm saying, though. It's like Benevolent, type of Satan or whatever the case be, where it's like the father, Lucifer, is like obviously this kind of good guy or whatever, or somebody get, well, not, I wouldn't say good guy, but like, more of a likable dude and basically keeping hell together is what it is. And then meanwhile, the one son wants to take over power, and then eventually he does and makes things way worse is what it is there. But anywho, so basically you have a situation there where with the revolution itself and stuff like that, there were definitely mitigating factors leading up to it is what it is. And I believe truthfully, like, no matter what, there was always going to be a collision course at some point, like whether it be 1776, whether it had been 1789, whether it had been, 1792, 94, 96, 1801, 1803, something like that is what it is, And the thing is, interestingly enough, if you think about it, though, logistically speaking, though, if the revolution never happened, and let's say the British Empire did control, the American territories at that point, the original 13 colonies and stuff like that, how much bigger would America have actually become? Would we have ever had the War of 1812? Would we have ever had, the expansion of stuff? I mean, hell, look back at the map back in those days, dude. You actually had at one point what became Ohio was just the Ohio Territory, and it was like 7 or 8 states that were combined together as like the Ohio Territory, where it was basically what is now the state of Ohio, and then I believe it was Kentucky and Tennessee underneath us as part of that whole thing, and then it was Michigan, I want to say a little sliver of Pennsylvania, and then the entirety of Indiana, Wisconsin, and I believe Illinois, and then maybe like one other state too for that matter. That's like whatever around that area there. And yeah, it was like legit like anywhere from like 6 to 8 or 9 states, then if that'd be the case, that were all the Ohio Territory then. And then there was obviously these various, Indian territories and stuff like that around them then after that. And then, of course, we kept, and that's the thing too, as well, people never really talk about, honestly, is like, when you look back into the people who became like presidents after the fact, like specifically, people always give Andrew Jackson a bunch of shit, but if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't have had like a lot of expansion to America is what it is, dude. Because it was actually, I believe, his presidency that actually led to a lot of that, honestly. And he was one of these guys who actually, interestingly enough, with Andrew Jackson, I believe it was Andrew Jackson I'm thinking of right now, he was actually a kid during the Revolution and stuff like that, and he was beat the fuck out of by the British Empire soldiers and stuff like that, dude. And that's why he hated the British so much. It's why he actually did public duels after public dueling really wasn't a thing anymore. Like, he would basically challenge people to public duels and then just shoot their asses is what it was. If I'm not mistaken, it was also Andrew Jackson that had like he had walked with a cane or whatever the case being, like beat some guy almost to death with the cane is what it was that he carried around with him. Because the guy was like trying to attack him. I think he tried to kill him or whatever the case be. He's like, nope, bitch. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Like, fucking great, man. And I would consider Andrew Jackson to be like a secondary founder of this country, honestly, dude, because he basically was like, you know, a kid that was living in the shadow of the founding fathers, what it was there. So, it's just funny. But yeah, the whole point is, though, it's like, you know, if it wasn't for him and like others around that time period, you wouldn't have had the expansion into other states, dude. You wouldn't have had the American Gold Rush, for God's sakes. And I'm trying to remember, because I'm thinking back, like there was a History Channel series. It was called The Men Who Built America, Frontiersmen, and it was like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago now. And my mind is like remembering pieces and bits of it is what it is, because that's the one thing that pissed me off, honestly, when Trump actually a couple years ago, when he was still in the presidency, talked about the Garden of Heroes and stuff like that. There's a guy named Kit Carson who should have been part of that, honestly. And for those who don't know who Kit Carson is actually a dude who back in the day was told by the president at the time, which I think might have been Andrew Jackson, if I'm not mistaken, who basically was like, hey, you know, here's a bunch of American dollars. Go to California and start riling up the people in California who actually are living in California, but considering it's a Mexican territory or whatever the case be. They're not actually allowed to technically own land there because it's still part of Mexico and stuff. And essentially, like, take over California is what he was telling them to do, basically, with U.S. dollars is what it was there. And so, yeah, you would have him basically handing out money to people and, like, trying to use, like, dollars instead of pesos is what it was then. And eventually it led to what became the exchange that eventually led to, you know, us taking over California from Mexico. And then eventually that's what led directly to the U.S. gold rush there in California. And so it's interesting when you look at history and stuff like that, had, you know, we never been an actual United States is what it is, and we still would have been in the British Empire's rule and stuff like that. Like, would that ever happen? Like, will we ever had, you know, people in that time of history and stuff like that expand what was the original 13 colonies into, like, you know, 20, 30, 40 states, and then eventually 50 states is what it is? I don't think they would have, honestly. I think you would still, I think, honestly, if that'd be the case, you would have, like, a way different look in America right now. Or maybe it's like the 25 states or something like that, and you have like all these Indian territories and stuff like that, or maybe like not even Indian territories anymore, but just like, you know, no-go zones and stuff, where it's just like all these various foreign nationals and shit like that live there, and they just hate fucking, you know, the states and stuff, and you just have like this weird border where it's like whatever, you know, most of the East Coast or whatever would be like the 25 states or whatever, and then you just have like this weird divide thing or whatever the case be, where it's a giant border wall like halfway through the fucking, you know, United States, and that would be the case. And it's just sort of a no-go zone over the border, then, if that'd be the case then. So, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see, honestly, dude. I'm sure there actually is, like, and that's the thing, like, I'm one of those people that believes in multiverse theory, so I believe, truthfully, there's, like, infinite universes in our multiverse is what it is. And I'm sure there's at least one or two out there that actually are exactly what I'm describing right now, where it's like, you know, we never did have a revolution in this country, whatever the case be, and the country still, like, is sort of like the British colonies or whatever the case be. And then it's essentially like, you know, the 25 states or whatever the case be of like whatever then. And then it's essentially like what I just described there, where it's like some border wall halfway between what is now America and then like whatever it would be after that, then all the no-go zones and stuff like that. So I don't know. It'd be interesting. There was another one actually on there too, on that History What If subreddit there, that was talking about like what if Oklahoma had never been conquered essentially and given, and you would have had it given to Native Americans, and now it'd be like majority Native American today or whatever the case be. And it's like, I don't know, man, that'd be interesting, honestly. I mean, there still is quite a big amount of tribes there, actually, for those who don't know about that. It's not really in the city areas. It's more or less like the outskirts of the Tulsa area and stuff like that there, where you just have like these tribal lands and stuff like that is what it is. So, and like reservations and whatnot. And that's the problem too, as well. Like all those reservations nowadays, it's just like, dude, those places are total shitholes in general. And that's the one thing that does piss me off about our government entirely. And it goes back to why, people should have a very distasteful trust of the government at this point. Is because of how they fucked over people, dude. They were told, the whole Trail of Tears thing back in the day. You had those who survived that and be sent off to tribal lands and, reservations and stuff like that. They were told, oh, hey, every month you're going to have you're going to have the U.S. government give you a fucking box of food for free. You know what they give them in that box of food? Basically nothing. They can make what they call fry bread. And basically, for those that have ever had an elephant ear, which is basically, it's things that we have here in East Coast where you can go to these fairs and festivals and stuff like that. And it's basically a giant piece of fried dough with cinnamon and sugar all over it. And I think it's similar to what they make there in the reservations as fry bread. Or it might just be more sugar than anything on those ones. But yeah, basically it's like very unhealthy. It's basically fried dough with a shitload of fucking sugar on top of it, dude. And it's like, yeah, and then you wonder why all these Native American people were so overweight and stuff like that. It's like, it's not that hard to figure out, dude. It's because you're eating like straight carbs and sugar. It's like, it's government just trying to kill them, dude, is what it is. It like, literally like 150 plus years later, it's the fucking U.S. government just trying to wipe these people out entirely, is what it is, man. And it's fucked up in general, dude. It really is. So, not to mention the fact that you have so many alcoholics on these reservations and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, it's just sad, man. It's just really sad. I was watching a thing. Again, this is something weird with my autism and stuff like that, where it's like, it's sort of like memories that are like snippets of things and stuff like that. And I want to say it was a 2020 special during Obama's administration that they were talking about there. And it was supposed to be like this reservation. I forget what state it was in. And obviously they were talking to one of these little Native American kids, and he was talking about wanting to be the first Native American president. And it's like, good luck to you, buddy. I don't think it's ever going to happen, guy. So, but you never know, man. But yeah, the whole point was, though, was like you had them basically going and doing stories of the reservation and stuff like that. And you had this woman who was actually, she was working as a like tribal council or whatever for the reservation, and like trying to do other things with like the state or whatever it was in there. And apparently the problem is, and she mentioned this, and why you don't really have a lot of businesses on the tribal land and like in the reservations and stuff like that, is because there's so much red tape that you're basically going through like unjust government burden after unjust government burden for like decades of your life, to where like pretty much you can start at the age of like 20. And by the time you're like 40 or 45, you finally have a small business, is what it is then, because there's that much red tape is what it is. It's so ridiculous, dude, is what it is. And the worst part is it's all by design. And then the worst thing about that one was they were talking about how you had alcoholism within a lot of the Native American groups now, is what it is now. And you would have, obviously you can't have, liquor stores or booze or anything like that on the reservations when it's supposed to be there. So you'll have places like, I can't remember if this is Utah, I was thinking it was now. Or it was one of those states around Utah, maybe, that this special was based in. But yeah, they're basically talking about how these people would drive off the reservation, go like a town or two over, find this random liquor store that was like right on the fucking like line, basically, of territories there between like reservation and like, not reservation. And they would basically just be there open like 24/7 is what it is, just selling a shitload of fucking booze to all the Native American people. In a lot of cases, it was like tall boys and like what was Four Locos back then and whatnot. And what would happen is you would have, these people go back home with all those, tall boys and stuff like that, get their drink on, eventually pass out from being drunk and stuff. And you would have a little bit left in the can. And, you have your, 8, 9, 10-year-old son, daughter, whatever it is, come out next morning and stuff, find dad passed out on the fucking, floor, on the couch, whatever it is. Look at the table, see one of these tall boys there, pick it up, realize there's still something in it and be like, because obviously like a lot of those were, like sweet sugar based things is what it is. Like they tasted like weird fruit punch with alcoholic flavors, what it is there. And so unfortunately, because of that, you would have a lot of these kids, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, etc., who would drink a little bit like that, and they would become, child alcoholics is what it would be then eventually, to where they eventually became teenage alcoholics eventually then, and the cycle just keeps repeating itself. Then is what it is. So it's very sad, honestly, dude. It really is. And I believe it's something that could definitely be dealt with accordingly. If people actually give a shit enough to actually deal with it is what it is, though. But unfortunately, again, it's these things that people really don't care about is what it is. Because, again, government's a bunch of fucking cunts is what it is, man. Legitimately. So, anyway. That's pretty much about it for today, I think, honestly. There's a couple other stories that were like what if scenarios here I thought was interesting that I could talk about for a couple more minutes, but I don't really feel like doing that is what it is right now. We might actually bring this up during Buckshot Thursday later today, actually, because there's two other ones I kind of wanted to touch on, and I'll maybe talk about them later today is what it is then. Which there was this one about would people of the past be as successful as today? It should be as successful today as they were in their own time. That's an interesting one, right? Because of course you'd have, a lot more hurdles to jump through. Of course, the burden to, build businesses and stuff like that would be a lot more and stuff like that. Regulation would be a lot more than it was back then, stuff like that. So probably not, honestly, would be my guess in many cases. Just like the same thing about how most people nowadays can't do the American dream with it, honestly, dude, because, we don't have the ability to just go out there and create a small business without government fuckery is what it is. I can't just go out there one day, buy a plot of land, and decide, oh, okay, I'm going to build this fucking building on this thing and turn it into like, a small mom and pop grocery store or like a liquor store, whatever the case be. No, I got to go get fucking building permits from the city, all kinds of ordinance bullshit, et cetera, pay off all kinds of money to these fucking people. And then it's basically, pay off a bunch of money to go get liquor licenses and stuff like that to actually sell liquor and stuff. And yeah, it's a bunch of fuckery, dude, entirely. Whereas meanwhile, back in our fucking founding fathers' day, or back in even the 1800s and stuff like that, like, no, dude, you would just build up a fucking bar, whatever the case be, and you'd fucking sell goddamn moonshine in that fucking place like it's going out of style, dude. Because fuck government. That's what it is. And that's why I think, honestly, like, truthfully speaking, one of the best things that happened in this country, honestly, is a revolution or some kind of civil war event right now, dude, that would eventually lead to no longer having any kind of federal government and not even really having state governments for the most part, honestly. And we would live so much more freer then, dude. It's one thing I talked to my uncle about before he passed in the last couple of years here from fucking, big pharma bullshit, of how much freer he was back in his childhood. They could literally just get on, like, and this is the thing too, by the way, going back to the high trust society stuff I mentioned in the last couple of episodes here is what it is. You would have them stick their fucking thumbs out and hitchhike back in the 1950s without the actual risk of being picked up by some child molester. Like, he would literally thumb his way to go be a fucking child caddy at a local golf course, making money off people. In many cases, the people that actually picked them up to go take them to the golf course were actually people that were golfing that day. And they would just talk in the car, like the 15, 20-minute drive, whatever it was there. And it would usually be that dude and his buddy would then be like the guy who was like, it was basically the guy who was driving and the guy who was going to meet to golf with. He would basically make my uncle and his buddy their caddies for the day. Then is what it was, and give them a couple dollars a piece then. Which back in those days was like basically like $20 to $50 nowadays is what it is then. So it was big money back then, dude. Like, he made quite a bit of cash in his own time is what it is there. His childhood there. And helped out his family quite a bit is what it was then. So anyway, but yeah, he would basically hitchhike like crazy is what it is. Then some random Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, whatever it was, they'd grab their fishing poles and just head down to the fucking pond and go fishing, dude. Didn't have to worry about fishing licenses, didn't have to worry about fucking government fuckery, anything like that. Same thing with hunting back in the day, by the way. You could just, even going back to like the 1930s and stuff like that with the Great Depression, it wasn't about getting a hunting license, dude, and going out and taking a white-tailed deer or, a bunch of rabbits or whatever the case be. It was like, no, fuck government, dude. Like, you had somebody literally go out there and grab a fucking shotgun and be like, well, I'm going to go get dinner tonight, and then take down a fucking deer, take down some rabbits or whatever the case be. And it's actually, interestingly, because you look back at those time period of history, that's actually where the term cut shells came from, is because you would have people who, were super poor back then during the Great Depression. All they would have would be like that 25 rounds of birdshot, and they needed to take down a deer or whatever the case be, or bigger game. And so they would basically slice around the fucking shell is what it was. And, almost cut through it, but not quite. load it up into the fucking chamber of their shotgun, and then boom, take down the fucking deer with more impact is what it was there, and you'd have the shell basically cut in half is what it is then when it ejects. So, because what you would basically have is you'd have like the entire front half of the fucking 12 gauge shell or 20 gauge shell, whatever it was, go with the actual wad, go with the load and everything like that. So anyway, it was a way bigger projectile hitting the fucking animals than it was there. So anywho, but yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was there was this one too, which is basically, what if the U.S. became a 3-party system? So the problem with that is, and I've talked about it before, honestly, dude, it's not that we don't need to be multiple party system. It's that, we wouldn't just be a 3-party system. We would be like a 50-party system is what we need to have, honestly, at this point. Because that's the thing. It's not like it should be like, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian or something like that, or Democrat, Republican, Green Party or something like that. It should be like Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, Constitutional Party, Communist Party, Socialist Party, Revolution Party, et cetera, and so forth and so on. Cyber Party, Internet Party, whatever the case be. Like it'd be like every single party and then some, dude. So, whatever people wanted to be, you could be that person. You could be that thing, honestly. And that's how most state governments, even the federal government, should be at this point, dude. It shouldn't be just like, majority Democrat, majority Republican. It should be you have a couple of these people here and there, and then it's basically you have other small groups, other small caucuses of like, libertarianism, Green Party people, et cetera. Maybe there's 4 or 5 communists in there that people are stupid enough to vote for is what it is there, et cetera there. So, or what they call Democrat socialists, or really just socialists, what it is at the end of the day. So, anyways, but yeah, that's pretty much it for the day, though. I will be back, and we're talking about if the revolution never happened for about the last 40 minutes or so, and then I'm just talking about various things now is what it is. Relating to other things. So yeah, basically just American politics and political stuff and whatnot. So anyways, but yeah, we'll be back tomorrow, or not tomorrow. Be back later today with Buckshot Thursday. We'll be talking about the Eli Dickin self-defense encounter from about 1.5 years ago in that Indiana mall, breaking down the timeline of events on that one, and basically just discussing like how good of a shot Eli actually was and why people should be practicing more is what it is right now. So anyway, other than that, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I will see you all in the next one, and then tomorrow we'll do Freedom Friday, obviously, and then we'll have Stand Your Ground Saturday at some point Saturday afternoon or evening, whatever it is there. And then I may do a takeover chat for Honda on Sunday. I'm not sure yet because I know he's supposed to work, and so he's not going to do a chat on Sunday. So I may take over that and just do like the first Tadpoolers chat or something like that then. But anyway, other than that, though, that's where we're at for the day. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you all in the next one. Later.